Hey guys, happy Monday. This is Tech Tip Talks. Hi, welcome. I'm gonna wait for Kristina to get here, and we will get started on our chat. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Well, for some of you, maybe another time. Here in Texas, it is morning. Hi,
Hi,
Kristina. How are you?
I am okay. How are you doing?
I'm hot.
Yeah. Listen, if
It's
I'm hot, then you're hot.
it's July.
Yeah.
How's everybody else here? Welcome. Glad you guys could be here with us today. I'm
Oh, I
Sarah.
want to say, oh,
Oh, go
sorry. Go
ahead.
ahead. Nope,
Are we
Sarah
getting?
Walworth. I'm Kristina McGrath,
We're tech
tech
editors,
editors, knitting tech
and
editors.
we love to chat and talk about knitting. I guess it's mostly knitting technical issues and how
In knitting
to.
patterns, how to make your patterns better, what things to watch out for.
And if you're a tech editor, we like to give some tips on how to check patterns better. We're glad that you guys are here with us. Creative Media K says in Denmark at 6 p.m. Oh, sun. It's not sundown, not that far north, but dinner time. Thank you for being here. What were you
Oh,
going
I
to say,
want to,
Kristina?
I just wanted to say that last week, my daughter, she's 11, and she watched some of our video after the fact,
Mm-hmm.
and she was really annoyed with how often I'm doing this, right? So I tried to explain to her that like I can't see. It's like I see blurry. I can't see the comments. I have to go forward to read them. So
Mm-hmm.
I just want to apologize if you're like she's like, that's terrible. It's a big zoom of your face. I'm like,
Uh, it's good. You got to be able to read the
I
comments.
can't see it otherwise.
Travel Lori says it's noon, North Carolina. How did you become tech editors? I suppose we can give a little background. We haven't done that
Yeah.
in a
Hi,
few times.
Josephine.
Hi, Joe. Nice to have you here. I became a tech editor. I was wrapping up my certification in copy editing, and I wasn't looking forward to editing medical journals or things like that or education material. And I found Jolie Kelly's learn to tech edit course, and I realized, oh, this is what I want to do because I love knitting. And I jumped in and I turned into a business pretty quick, and I still enjoy it very much. Tech editing is a lot of fun. How about you, Kristina?
I always wanted to work from home, but it never worked out. And the place I'd been working for a long time was closing because the owner retired. So I tried a couple jobs and it was not good. And so I was looking again, what can I do from home? And I was on Instagram for knitting at that time, like just knitting stuff. And I too saw Jolie Kelly's tech edit courses and I was like, what's that? And the more it was like made for me, like the more I learned about it, I was like, this job was made for me. This
Mm-hmm.
is like my dream job. This is like uses all the like funny skills I have that can be like this great job. So
Mm-hmm.
I love it. And I did learn a lot about how to run a business, online and be self-employed. I
Mm-hmm.
had never done that before.
Yep.
So,
Me neither. It was
yeah.
a big learning curve for me to learn how to manage a business while doing all the other things at home.
But I think if you don't want to, like, I think if I hadn't wanted to work at home, like if that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a goal,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would have even, like, because I wouldn't have
Right.
thought about it. Like, that's the place I was in.
Right.
Oh, we got a comment I missed. Don't you worry about leaning forward. We are just so thankful to share your expertise. Thank you.
You can lean in all you want, Kristina.
Who are your kids if they're not picking on you, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say. So if you're interested in learning how to tech edit, the course that we took to do it is still available. You can go to the Tech Editor Hub here on Instagram,
Well, and
or
it's been
also
changed now. It's
it's it's been changed and updated and even
yeah,
better, I
it's
think.
even better. So now it's like it
It's a master
includes
class.
it is a master class and it includes more than what we had at
Hmm.
that time. She's really done a lot of updating with it. I bet it's like amazing now.
So part of what we're going to talk about today is what tech editors do and what we check for. Tech editors are basically checking every number, every word, and make sure that there aren't any spelling errors and typos and things like that, but also making sure that the instructions work and that they will produce what you say it will in your design. So it is writing a knitting pattern is a difficult form of technical writing. It's not so easy to convey on paper, well, not paper, but even digital form, what we're doing with our hands. And we use abbreviations and technical language. And so our job as technical editors really is it's a specialized field in a very narrow niche. So today we're going to talk about 4 things. We're going to review the 4 things that tech editors generally look for when they're correcting your pattern. We call it the 4 C's, as in C is for cookie. C is for clarity, consistency, conciseness, and correctness. And these 4 aspects is what a tech editor will look for in order to make sure that your pattern is not only giving the instructions in a way that the knitter can understand, but it kind of like polishes it. And if you address these 4 things, it actually can make your pattern even better than before. So which one did you want to start with, Kristina?
I want to start with clarity just because I think the other things so much relate to that it would be good to talk about clarity first.
So what is clarity? Clarity is clear. Like your instructions are not vague, right? Is that
right?
how you would define it?
Yes, and that they make sense,
Right.
That it's not confusing, that they're easy to follow, that it's obvious what is going on, and it's very clear what is happening and what the knitter needs to do. And there's lots of ways to help make your pattern more clear. I think basic stuff, like just basic things that I think about are like punctuation and spacing, numbering things, naming charts, naming sections. And then when you refer to those sections in charts, be sure that you're using the names you gave those sections in charts. Don't have some new name for it, so naming things, numbering things. Spacing seems like so stupid. I was just laughing today because I was taking these notes, and the first blog post I ever wrote on my website was so funny. The first blog post I ever wrote was about punctuation. It's so silly, but it makes a big difference. Like if I go to tech edit a pattern and there's not any space on the whole page for me to write a note,
A wall of text.
yeah, there needs to be some, because visual breaks in text make something easier to take in, right? As reading it. And if you're working from it, it's really easy to get lost.
Right.
In a pattern because you're looking up and down, So I think that things like that, referring to things by the same name, numbering rows, putting any notes up front for the knitter. We talked about this last week, but any notes that the knitter's going to need to work a section or work something,
right?
It needs to be ahead of the work in the beginning, not after the instructions have been given.
And so to make things clear, also, if you're saying punctuation, like if you use a pattern, knit 1, purl 1, knit 3, purl 2, and that section is repeated, it has to be clear exactly what's being repeated. So your repeat notation should be very clear and maybe even notated in the abbreviations list. If you use parentheses to note what's getting repeated, or asterisks, or whatever other format. In other words, your formatting of your pattern, whether it be spacing or punctuation, is what it achieves clarity, not just writing down the instructions.
Well, and that's where I think tech editing and testing is really helpful. It's a partly opportunity for things like that to get noticed or get caught or flagged, like what are we repeating here? But it's also a way to have multiple eyes on your pattern who can look at it and let you know if something doesn't make sense.
And it's a great thing to ask your testers. Is there any part in this pattern that's not clear, that
Right.
could be worded differently to make it more clear? And a lot of times this is something that is a little vague or fuzzy, sometimes has to do with repeats. Like if you repeat a whole section and you say, well, repeat the previous 5 rows, or repeat these 5 rows, is usually where I go, wait a minute, which 5 rows?
Yeah.
Which ones are you talking about? And maybe you want to be more specific. So sometimes just being specific about instructions can lend clarity.
And that's where tools like naming
Mm-hmm.
things and numbering things,
Right.
using the same punctuation for the same things,
Mm-hmm.
can help you, because you can refer to those things and the knitter knows exactly what you're talking about.
And one thing that I found helps a lot with clarity in instructions is when a designer gives me like a technique, like say for instance the German short row, and they write out word for word what they're doing with the needles. That helps, especially if as you do it you're writing down, okay, then you take the working yarn and you wrap it over the needles. And sometimes just being clear in a small paragraph as a note for a technique can immensely help the knitters
Clarity is
to.
tricky with, like you said in the beginning of this, like
Mm-hmm.
describing what you're doing with your hands. And of
Right.
course, because these techniques need to be worked particularly,
Mm-hmm.
they need to be worked correctly.
To be reproduced by the knitter.
Right. So it does need to be clear what the knitter has to do. Like the goal is that they can read the directions. And if they're following exactly what you say, then
Mm-hmm.
they're going to get it. They can trust those instructions.
Exactly.
So that's why it's helpful, I think, to have people looking over it who are reading it, people looking
Mm-hmm.
over it who are trying to actually do it,
Mm-hmm.
and you taking a break from it and then, coming back a day or two later and looking at it and thinking, does that make sense? And all
And
these things lead into the
yeah.
next C's, but I mean,
Well, and I think the one last thing we want to touch on with clarity is don't assume that your knitters know what you're talking about.
mm,
So a lot of times when I'm tech editing, my mind will just kind of gloss, oh yeah, I know what that is. Oh yeah, I know what that is. And I have to really slow down and think, oh, if I were only seeing this pattern for the first time, in this technique for the first time, would I really know what this means? And so then I might as a tech editor, I make a suggestion to the designer. Could you say this differently to explain this a little better? And definitely that is the kind of thing as a tech editor might take a little bit of skill and training, not training, but practice. How can I encourage a different way of saying this? Maybe you could give a couple suggestions that this might make it more clear.
and and even if you don't, as a tech editor, I mean, if you, like, yes, say that this part doesn't work or this is not
Mm-hmm.
very clear, I'm not sure what you're doing here, even if
Right.
you are, but you're worried the knitter might not understand what's going on, and give some suggestions of how they might say it differently. But even if you can't think of something else, even if
Mm-hmm.
you can't come up with another way to say it, it's okay.
Right.
That's not really your job. Still let them know that that part is confusing.
Yes,
Don't
exactly.
don't feel like just because you can't solve this paragraph,
Mm-hmm.
that you should let it go. Let them
Right.
know it doesn't work, that it's confusing. You know,
Exactly. So the next one I think was consistency. Is that right? That you had on your
consistency.
list? What does it mean to be consistent?
That you say things consistently
You
and
say the
use things
same,
consistently,
in other
use the
words,
same things for the same
mm-hmm,
things, um,
throughout the
throughout your
whole
pattern.
pattern. So if you use
Yeah.
a lowercase k and a lowercase p for all your abbreviations for knit and purl, and you never capitalize any of them, don't change it halfway through.
I have a blog
Don't.
post about this too.
Oh, do you? Oh man. See, y'all just need to go to
All the little
Kristina's
things that I'm
blog.
like persnickety about.
Mm-hmm. But
But
this is
yeah,
it. It may seem like a really small thing, like who cares if I capitalize or if I don't capitalize? But actually, that is what lends professionalism to your product. is if everything is absolutely consistent. If you always use the same abbreviations, if you abbreviate in line instructions but not in paragraphs, so then you do it through the whole thing. Otherwise, when it'll trip up your knitter, as they're working through it, their brain will say, wait, this is different. Why did she do this differently? Is this a mistake? Should
We're
I
like
trust her?
subconsciously drawn to these little things that
Yep.
aren't part of the pattern or don't
Right.
seem relevant, but we notice them and we're drawn to
Yes.
them in the same way that
And it
to make a
distracts.
pattern clear, you maybe need to use some spacing that's creative. You need to make sure your spacing is consistent, right?
Yes.
If you're putting a line break in between every row, you can't stop doing that.
Right.
If you're using parentheses to indicate centimeters, you can't use brackets later.
Right. Exactly.
You know, there's solutions to these things because sometimes I know it can be tricky. You're like, oh, but I already used a bracket for this. Well, there's solutions. There's ways to do things differently. You know, there's ways to do your repeats, but just make sure you're doing them the same. If you do capitalize like the beginning of all the sentences or the first letter of every instruction row is capitalized, you can't stop doing that.
Right.
You have to do it all the way through.
And that's
It
just
really
part of
makes a
having a
difference.
professional text.
Right. Now, if you want to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is, okay, Kristina, how do I remember all these decisions that I've made? Because they're
I have
all
a
it
blog
is
post on that too.
you do too. Y'all need to go to her blog and just go read everything. There's a note for you. Can you lean forward and read this one? Creative spacing.
What? Creative spacing.
Spacing, never.
Oh my God. Hi, Tal.
So here's
funny.
the thing, is this is all, the thing about consistency is usually related to style. So style is the decisions that you make related to capitalization, punctuation, formatting, wording. And if you make a sheet where you list all the things that you've decided, this is called a style sheet, or a style guide. And then you don't have to remember later. All you have to do is look at your style choices when you're doing your final review of your pattern before you send it to your tech editor or your testers, and just apply everything. And that's what will help you remember and will help you be consistent. So use a style sheet to help you remember them, and then also hand it over to your tech editor so they can double check it for you.
Do. If you have another pattern that's completed that you like and you haven't created a style sheet, you can send that completed pattern to the tech editor if that's what you want your pattern to be modeled after. And even say you want to change how you're doing things. Say you want to make
Totally
your patterns
okay.
look differently. Say you're not happy with how your older ones have been done or whatever. Or, you know, even if you don't have consistency across all of your patterns, the pattern needs to be consistent to itself.
Internally, like
Yes.
within the pattern
Internal
itself.
consistency, very good.
Yeah.
It needs to be that way because otherwise it's going to mess up the knitter. And it looks, I mean, I don't want to sound like mean, but it looks lazy, right?
It can. It could mean that you don't really care. It could come across that way, even if you really do.
Even if you really do. So because
really care.
Because
if you don't
like
have
that,
consistency, it can lend an air of
And because it appears that way, like we talked about in another video, I forget which one, but it aids to the knitter like not trusting you.
Right.
Right.
So
and
from
that's
the
what
tech
you want is for them to trust you.
This is a good question. Well, not really a question, but a comment. She says, no designer I've ever edited for has ever had a style sheet, which is okay. You're not required to use a style sheet as
it's
a
just a helpful
knitwear designer.
Tool if you
it's
want
a helpful
one.
tool for checking. But you know what I do is I will make a style sheet for the designer. As I'm editing, I will make note of what they usually do with line instructions, what kind of abbreviations they usually use. I'll just make like a little cheat sheet for myself so that I can make sure as a tech editor that their pattern is internally consistent. And then that also might lead to a few queries to the designer. Hey, you use a comma here, but here you use an ampersand. Here, you used parentheses, but here you use asterisks. Which do you prefer? Choose one or the other and make it consistent throughout. So then as a tech editor, they may not have a style sheet, but that doesn't mean that you can't make sure that their style internally in the pattern is consistent.
Well, and even across patterns, like I am aware of that. If there's somebody that I tech edit for often and have been for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
I'll pull up some of their older patterns if something I notice. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't remember them doing that way.
Right.
You know, and so I'll tell them, hey, this is how you've said this before, and you're
Right.
doing it this way, because they don't always do it on purpose. They're not
Right.
trying to, list the yarn differently or capitalize things differently. They just didn't realize, oh yeah, you're right, I did do it that way. And then, I think it helps them, ask some questions about how do they really want it to be and what do they intend,
Yes, exactly.
Because like she said, you make notes of
Yeah.
what the designer's typical style is, and then those things you'll notice. And
So
you can
then
let them know about it.
that segues into the next one, which is being concise.
Mm.
How you say things. Now, this also goes back to style. You can be as wordy as you want. If that's your style, is to be a storyteller in your pattern, it's totally fine. But you also might consider, how can you say this in a way that doesn't make a huge wall of text? Is there a way that you could prune it a little to make it more concise and not quite as confusing?
Well, and I think it's important to say that being concise in your instructions does not mean that you have to leave things out.
That's
it doesn't
right.
mean that you
Very
can't
good.
cover everything you want to cover.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't need to, like me, for example, right? I go on and on about things. I repeat myself all the time. In a pattern, you don't need to do that. It's there. You don't need to say something over and over again. You don't need to, even without saying it over and over again, you might not need to give all of what you
Mm-hmm.
might say about it, because you don't want the instructions and the important parts to get lost.
Right.
You want to make sure that the instructions are clear, and sometimes instructions can get lost when things are not as concise as they could be. But it doesn't mean you have to leave things out.
No, absolutely not.
You
You
know,
shouldn't leave it. Everything should be included. But sometimes there is a way to reword things so that it's not as lengthy or doesn't take up as, like, even I've seen patterns where they go knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, and then work pattern. Well, you could say knit one, purl one 3 times.
mm-hmm.
In other words, that's a way of alleviating some of the what could possibly be confusion, or even the knitter having to go, hey, wait, they said 3 times. Is it 3 times? Is it 2 times?
Well, and that is confusing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good example of a way that concision can really help. Like, think about
Right.
it. If you're reading a number and it's got like 5 zeros, your brain is like, how many zeros? You have to like use a pencil and
Mm-hmm.
count slowly to catch all
Mm-hmm.
the zeros. And it's the same way with something like that, like a repeat like that. Knit one, purl one, knit one, purl. How many knits is that? Like,
Right.
how many is that? Because they look like a line, just
Mm-hmm.
like a row of it. So
So
yeah, it doesn't. You don't
that's
need
like
to say more than you need to say.
exactly, and that's like a simple example. But there's lots of ways where what I would suggest is, if you're a designer, is make a final copy of your pattern text before you send it to your tech editor. Step away for a day or two and come back and read it again with fresh eyes and see, is there anything here that I can say in a different way, or that I can make a little bit more clear and a little bit less wordy. And it may not be. Maybe as you're writing, you're like, oh no, this is all it. But that's one way to think about it too, is to give yourself some space from the pattern and
If
see
you have,
what you can change or polish.
if you have
So,
something in a note, like at the top,
mhm.
you don't always have to repeat it again at the end of every 4
Right.
rows or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
If you've said it, if you've
Once.
said something about these 2 rows and those
Hmm.
rows are going to be repeated, you don't have to say that at the end of those 2 rows every single time.
Right.
Little things like wording, and within the instructions, like Sarah said about the knit one,
Hmm.
purl one, there's so many ways to, well, and with consistency, like if you do that and you write
Hmm.
knit one, purl one times
Right.
3 or 3 times,
Hmm.
or repeat from star, whatever, then later on, don't write knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one. You have to
Right.
make sure you put the repeat, you know?
Exactly. So this leads to the last thing, which is correctness. So that is the basic low bar thing of what a tech editor should do for you is make sure your pattern's correct. Granted, do you miss stuff, Kristina?
Sure.
I miss stuff.
We miss
Not
stuff.
all the time, but a
Not
lot
all
of
the
times
time, but it happens. I mean,
it does
it
happen.
happens.
But
We're still people, so
we're not perfect.
it
But
happens.
we do send, when a designer sends their pattern to a tech editor, the goal is that they would get all of the errors found in the pattern so that it can be completely clear of errors so that when the knitter comes to it, they're not going to find a mistake, and it leads to trust between the knitter and the designer.
We have a comment.
Tal says, for what it's worth, after Kristina had worked a few patterns of mine and she realized how inconsistent I was, she suggested that maybe we should make a style sheet for me together. Gold. Absolutely. It
Yes, we
is.
did. We made a style sheet.
So a lot
And
of
if you
times,
want one but you're daunted by it, like ask your tech editor.
yeah,
They could totally help
exactly.
you write one.
Your tech editor may be able to help you with that, and that will make their job easier too.
And you can
So,
constantly update it, add things, change things. As a designer, I refer back to my own style sheet to keep myself more consistent. Yeah, it's a good tool to
it's
use.
an excellent tool to use for when you're pattern writing. And there are style sheets out there that are put out by your own company. I think Knitty.com has one that you can use that as a base for yours. You don't have to come up with a style, or you can even purchase a pattern from a designer that you love and mimic their style if you really like how they describe things. There's nothing wrong with that. If you are producing your own work and not copying theirs. So back to correctness. We want to make sure that there's no errors in the pattern. And there's a couple ways to do this. You can hire a tech editor to help you to suss out the math errors or pattern writing errors. And that's what they should be doing if you've hired them. The other thing that you can do is kind of like a double layer that a lot of my clients do is they will get the pattern tech edited and then they'll send it for testing. Where you can hire or use testers to see if everything works actually physically on the needles. Sometimes when we're tech editing, we're doing crunching numbers, we're knitting in our head, but then when it's actually worked on the needles, there may be something that's has to be fixed. So there's a 2-layer process that a lot of clients that I have use. You're not required to use both, ever. There's no requirement. These are all just suggestions, but that can help to find all the errors. Tal says, oh, we already read that.
We already read that.
Sorry.
So like to make it, I wrote that too, that tech editing and testing really, it can help in different ways to help double check your patterns correct. And you really, you need to make sure that the pattern matches the sample and it's going to produce the sample.
That's
you need
the key.
You need to make sure that the ease is what you intend, for everybody and everything. The stitch patterning matches up and lines up.
The cables cross in the right direction.
Yeah, like there's so much more than just the math coming out right.
Yes.
There's a lot going on.
And you can do a lot of this kind of checking yourself and then send it to a tech editor. Some people don't even use a tech editor; they just use testers. I don't highly recommend that. I don't because I think people should be paid for their work for that kind of technical expertise. But definitely, you've got to check yourself, and sometimes it helps to give yourself some distance by a day or two to go through and recheck the math. Do all the stitch counts match? Does every line make the same number of decreases that I say it does? Those kind of things. I don't know what else you could say. Everything in the pattern has to match.
Well, I did those 2
sense.
videos. I did those two IGTV videos on going over the designer checklist that they can use before they send it to you. And then I did a a second one that added
Yes.
a few things that I've noticed a lot. So there's those 2 videos are there too.
And that's on your IGTV. Is that
I
correct?
can share it in my stories after I share ours.
Yes, please do that, because then
Because there are
there's
these
checklists
basic
out there.
things that we
Mm-hmm.
notice a lot that you
Mm-hmm.
can just purposely draw your eye to before you send it off. That might save you a lot of time and money.
Right.
You
It
know.
could. And if you work with a tech editor and they regularly mark the same thing, like my tech editor always marks my sleeve decreases, then I know automatically before I send it to my tech editor, I need to go double check my sleeve decreases and make sure I got it right this time. And then, yay, if I did. It's pretty exciting when you do get stuff right.
Mm.
So, do you guys have any questions about the 4 C's, which are clarity, consistency, concision, and correctness? Go ahead and throw them into the comments. We do have a question to answer that one of our followers asked, but we're open right now. If you guys have a question that you'd like to ask Kristina or I about
Yes,
tech
please
editing or
throw in your
about pattern writing,
questions.
throw
Yeah,
it in there.
anything. It does anything.
So Friendly Tech Editor asked us
Oh, hold
a
on. We
really
have a
great
question.
question. Oh, you want to answer this one first?
I
Okay.
really like how clearly one designer's pattern describes a particular short row technique. Is it plagiarism to use her description if she is credited with the technical description?
Techniques cannot be copyrighted. So
Right,
that's one thing. However, it isn't ethical to copy it word for word. So what you
right,
can do is reach out to that designer and compliment them and say,
right.
"Hey, I love how you write this. If can I borrow your description for my pattern if I credit you in my
Mm-hmm.
pattern? If you want to do it word for word. Otherwise, you need to reword it. You've got to use a different way. Not a different way like you don't have to use completely different words, but you should say it in your own words if you're not going to credit them. It's
Yeah,
just a matter of ethics. No technique can actually be copyrighted. That's just
yeah,
flat across the board how it works in our industry.
yeah. And
Um,
sometimes that's unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
yeah,
And
but
sometimes that's,
her words are copyrighted, so you really should ask before you use them.
I agree.
Does that answer it? Let us know if you need more clarity on that. So the question that we got in our inbox was, when do you use, when converting from inches to centimeters or from centimeters to inches, when do you use 2.54 to 2.54 centimeters to 1 inch? And when do you use 2.5 centimeters to 1 inch? This is a great question. And the thing about this, let's say just an overarching, our opinion as tech editors, and we're very opinionated, we have our preferences. We think it's awesome if you want to include metric and imperial measurements in your patterns. Think about your broad audience,
Yes,
how
it
broad
makes
your
your
audience
pattern
is.
more accessible to everybody.
I think there's only 2 countries in the world that use inches. Everybody else
Exactly.
uses centimeters.
Right,
So think about who you're selling to.
right.
It's smart to use centimeters, and if you are in another country besides the United States, it's smart to use inches to appeal to American knitters. So when do you use what ratio in order to convert your measurements? Kristina, you want to take this answer?
So going to correctness is kind of interesting. Like, you want the pattern to be correct and you want the finished object to be the right size and what you intend it to be with the ease you intend and to match the sample. So it needs to be right, which means that the gauge needs to be right. So
Yes.
gauge is given over 4 inches and 10 centimeters,
Mm-hmm.
typically.
Yes.
Like, you're not married to that. You can do whatever you want to your pattern. But
Mm-hmm.
generally in our industry, that's how it's given, is over 4 inches and 10 centimeters. Because 10 centimeters is not exactly
Exactly
the same
equivalent.
as 4 inches,
Mm-hmm.
but 2.54 is the
Centimeters.
exact measurement that's going to get you the exact number of centimeters for inches and the exact number of inches for centimeters. But the gauge is not given over that exact number. So because
That's
of
right.
that, when you multiply that little bit you're off by using 2.54 instead of 2.5, which would give you the 10 centimeters, and you multiply that by all the stitches and all the rows that are in your pattern, your numbers are going to be off.
Yep.
And throughout the pattern, there's many measurements given maybe that you're working to, or measurements done on the schematic that people think is going to be the size they're going to get. And these are all based on 2.54, but your gauge is based on 2.5.
The ratio of
the ratio. Sorry.
The ratio of 4 inches to 10 centimeters is a 2.5 ratio. So that's why you should use that one.
Right.
That's the way I think about it.
Let's be concise here.
Well,
be clear.
It's kind of goes against our thought though, because if you've done any kind of science, you would be like, but it's not precise. Mm-hmm. But it's true. It's not precise, but it's more accurate. Because if you're making if the ratio, the gauge is everything. If your gauge is a 2.5 ratio, then your whole pattern should be at that ratio. Otherwise, it's going to be off. Mm-hmm. If you want to use 2.54, then you need to use 1 inch, or you should use 4 inches to 10.14 or 10 point whatever. I can't remember.
I can't remember what it is.
4 centimeters. It's a little tricky, but it doesn't sound like it makes sense. But in reality, if it all is based on what you're asking the knitter to work for gauge.
And using the 10 centimeters for gauge as opposed to using the exact centimeter mm-hmm. gauge that equals 4 inches, or changing the 4 inches to equal 10 centimeters. Like, mm-hmm. the negative thing about changing your gauge to do that is that it's going to be a hard measurement to attain. It's going to be mm-hmm. not easy to figure out what your gauge is based on something so odd. The only yes. time I've noticed it can be better and useful to make your gauge not over 10 centimeters but over 10 point odd number is if you're dealing with something very, very small, like some toys, things like that are very, very small,
where you're
that
dealing
need
with...
to be exactly right. Or something that needs to be assembled, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're dealing with something small that then needs to be put together, and it really mm-hmm. matters that these pieces match exactly, and you really need those exact numbers, it's going to be really important that... But then again, if you're using 2.5 and you working the whole thing that way, it still would be okay, but you'd have to make sure to change your measurements. Like I worked with somebody once who refused to use 2.5, mm-hmm. and these were all tiny little things that had to be assembled, and she refused to use 2.5, which is fine, but then her
totally
gauge
fine.
So she voted to change her gauge to 10 point whatever instead of changing
centimeters.
Her conversion rate, because she really felt it was important to be precise. So if that's really important to you, that's okay. But mm-hmm. but know that if you're still using a 10 centimeter gauge, mm-hmm. everything's going to be off.
And here's the thing. If your pattern is worked to measurements, so it's worked to 4 inches, work to whatever, then you could convert to centimeters using 2.54 if you want to, but only if your whole pattern is done in the way of only working to inches. If you're not doing it if you at all are just calculating stitches and rows and rounds using your gauge of 10 centimeters to 4 inches, then you've got to use a 2.5 ratio. That's just our opinion. Everybody does it a little bit differently. We just think it's better to be less precise, to be more accurate.
There's a good article out there that explains this really well. If you want it just like written down somewhere and you're not like, we're just being too
and
blah, blah, blah. But
our colleague, Tabitha Dukes, is the person who wrote a blog post on this, and I'll see if I can find it today and post it in my stories, so you guys actually have a link to an article. I give it all the time to people because it's so helpful to see, even from, she's a scientist, if you see it from a scientist's point of view, it's like, it doesn't make sense, but it does if you're looking at what gauge, how gauge is stated. I
Yeah.
hope that answers your question, friendly tech editor. Please let us know if we didn't make things clear.
Yeah. But do
And
check out that blog post. So we got some questions.
Creative Media K says inch is not the same in UK and USA, and that makes it tricky too if one does not know where the pattern is from. That's a good point. I don't know how far off they are from each other. I'm not sure. We have another question before that. Oh,
Yeah,
Tal
we had.
asks, how do you remember to check all the things in a pattern? Always seems to forget some of the C's. I always seem to forget. We have checklists.
We have checklists.
And I think that's the one.
And that's, I think, why I think it's a good idea for a designer to use a checklist. I mean, same
Yeah,
as you would do anything
right.
you're working on, you're going to double check
Mm-hmm.
certain things that really matter or whatever. So
Yes.
we check things too.
We use checklists a lot because there are days where I can't remember. Wait, what am I supposed to do again at the
And like,
end of
and
the
like I've
pattern?
said this before, I think I had a video about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
a terrible, boring video, but I don't use the checklist as I edit. I use it at the end like a
Right.
checklist to check things off. Did I do that? Did I do that? I check it off
Yes.
at when I'm done. See if I've forgotten anything.
Yep. Do
So
you guys
that's
have any
how.
more questions? I think we're almost out of time here.
Yep.
If you have a question, please throw it in the comments now. We are gonna, next week, we're gonna revisit gauge. Why gauge is so important. How do you measure gauge? How do you write about gauge? What do you do when your gauge doesn't match?
And this is something that there is a ton of opinion about.
Oh, yeah.
Not everyone agrees about how gauge should be. Some people, how it should be measured, how it should be done. Not everybody agrees about it, but we have opinions about it.
Oh, we're so opinionated. We'll give you ours free, no charge. We'll give you our opinions. So think about this week if you guys have questions about gauge or what trips you up about gauge when you are pattern writing, when you're designing, where you get stuck. Please do not hesitate to shoot us a direct message or to ask a question when I post on Sunday night. And we'll be sure to address your questions. Moonstone Beach says, does pattern support take a lot of time? I don't do pattern support. Do you, Kristina?
I don't offer pattern support. There's been a few
Maybe we
times
should
where I've.
define what pattern support
So pattern
is.
support is not tech editing before the
Mm-hmm.
pattern's been sent out to knitters. Pattern support is when knitters have trouble with the pattern and they contact you,
Yes.
your pattern support person, or they contact the designer to say, hey, I'm doing this in your pattern. I'm confused about this. Can you help me?
Right.
That's pattern
Right.
support. So that's not what we do.
No,
And
I don't do that. I work
a couple times
directly
I
with
have
my
been
client.
yeah, me too. And a couple times I have been involved in pattern support through the client, like
Mm-hmm.
not to the knitter, but and
Mm-hmm.
what I have found about pattern support that might take a lot of time for someone who's working in pattern support or the designer who has to do pattern support is that it can be very time consuming because it includes a lot of back and forth between the knitter because you need
Yes.
to find out their exact circumstances in their knitting to find out why they're having a problem.
Right.
So you don't just have to solve their problem, you've got to figure out why they have it and what they've done.
Pattern
So I
support
think,
can take a designer a lot of time.
yeah.
And this is why we recommend upfront getting your pattern before you publish, tech edited and tested. And I think that kind of slows down the amount of pattern support that you will have.
Yes, I mean, that's the goal, right? To
Reduce
have
it.
knitters have an easy time with your pattern and you
Mm-hmm.
not to need so much time spent in pattern support. Yeah.
I think it can take a lot of time. When my clients have reached out to me and said, hey, I'm getting questions about this part, I will relook at it again and answer
Yes.
my client directly. I don't ever answer a knitter directly.
Same. Same.
But I will help them out if they need it. A lot of times tech editors can be like in the back room going, hey, let's help solve this problem.
Right.
I would say 90% of the time, the knitter didn't get the gauge that the designer.
Yes, the same.
90% of the time, customer service issues on patterns have to do with gauge. So we'll talk about that next week too.
Well, this is something that comes up in testing too. Lots of times if your testers have issues, I think your very first question needs to be, what gauge did you get? How did you measure your gauge?
Yes.
How did you measure your gauge? What gauge did you get? Because lots of times testers they're not always knitting to the gauge of the pattern. You really need to know because
Or they've
otherwise their
done
feedback's not going to be as helpful.
they've done a yarn substitution, which isn't uncommon. I don't know. I don't have the yarn everybody else
Me
knits
neither.
with. So, but certain yarn sometimes can't get a gauge that
Right.
the designer intends. And so the knitter has to make modifications to the pattern, and then that can lead to snowball into other troubles.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question, Moonstone Beach. Thanks very much for asking. So you guys have any other questions? I think we're out of time.
I think we are.
We have to keep this short so that I can actually upload it to IGTV.
Right.
Thank you for joining us. We love chatting with you and nerding out over technical issues. Thank you for answering my question. I really enjoy these lives. We enjoy having you here. Thank you
We
for
do.
joining us.
Thank you guys so much. And if you have any questions, please just ask anything.
If you're watching this recorded later, please don't hesitate to shoot us a direct message if you have a question about anything that we've talked about. Next week, stay tuned. We will be talking about gauge again. See you next Monday at noon Eastern, 11 Central. Have a great week, you guys. Be safe.
Bye, everybody.
Be healthy. Bye. I'm gonna figure out how to turn it off.